Welcome back. I think there's a little bit of a melt, so there might be a seat or two available now. You can't hear me? Is that better? Can we turn this mic up maybe? Because I feel like I'm shouting into it and I don't... Is this better? Oh, thank you. That's much better. So we hope you enjoyed lunch. We're going to start round 2, or as we named it, PM.
So this is for Dushko Petrovic. He was born in Quito, Ecuador, and raised in northern Ohio. After graduating from Yale, he was awarded the Hayes Brandeis Traveling Fellowship and moved to Italy and Denmark for a number of years before returning to the U.S. Upon completing his MFA at Boston University, he served as the Star Scholar at the Royal Academy of Arts in London. He's exhibited his paintings at Soloway, Vogt, and the Rachel Uffner Gallery in New York, and at the Suburban in Chicago. His next exhibition will be a 3-person show at DC Moore in May. In addition to writing for Slate, Modern Painters, Book Forum, and the Boston Globe, he is co-founder of Paper Monument, where he recently co-edited I Like Your Work, Art and Etiquette, and also Draw It With Your Eyes Closed, The Art of the Art Assignment. He teaches at Boston University, RISD, and Yale. Please welcome Dushko Petrovic.
Yeah, now I'm the new person who doesn't know where the button is. Oh, great, thank you. It's very bright up here. Yeah, so this this part of the show is going to be painting contracted, as you can see. We have a very dark painting, which looks very different on this screen, and different on that screen, and different in real life, and that's actually part of the point. I tried to figure out what it is that I do overall, and if there was any way of accounting for it, and this is what I came up with, which was making things that don't exist. And one of the first things that I made, which didn't exist, was these black flowers. And I had painted flowers for a while, kind of as the kind of quintessential painted object, like #1 painted object, and an object which is actually very similar to a painting already, you know, sort of the kinds of things that we expect from flowers and the kinds of things we expect from paintings are very similar. And I painted them in color for a long time, and thought about, you know, the kinds of things that we get from color and from flowers. And then at a certain point, I thought I had done enough, and then I started making them all black. So these are just entirely Mars black paint. I just wanted the most simple, straightforward paint, and I'll just click through a few of them so you can see, or not see, what they are. And obviously they change dramatically based on what the lighting conditions are and what the what your position is. So sometimes people walk in and they think they have a bunch of black monochrome paintings, and then suddenly they see the flower appears, it disappears, it flips around. What becomes bright is dark, what becomes dark is bright. And I was thinking too that they're like us now. Like, we know we're going to be photographed. We know that we're going to exist in some digital realm. So they also, these ones actually were scanned. I put them on a scanner and scanned them in. And then obviously they're very different projected than they are like on this screen. That looks completely different. So yeah, just so you get an idea. This is an installation shot. Maybe you can see sort of how they look, you know, from the side. This was at the show at the Suburban. And then I made a big one. So this is like 9 feet by 8 feet kind of one. And I don't know, maybe you can see. I have a different view than you, but there's one sitting there. Big one. And so then this is related. If the flowers were kind of questioning about, you know, why would you paint anything at all? And coming up with a kind of, I mean, it was very important for me with those flowers that they not be any particular kind of flower. Like it's not a rose, it's not a chrysanthemum or anything. It's just kind of the idea of a flower. Got me into this like oddly platonic kind of mood. And so I put together this show, which actually Mary Weatherford was in, which was all about Plato's cave. And actually we're standing at the point where Mary's painting of the cave was at one end, which was the inside, and then looking back out at the rest of the space. And one of the things I've done with the black flowers is that in the exhibitions oftentimes I don't have them put any lights on. It's just whatever the ambient light is in the gallery. And for this one I just had the one spotlight. For this exhibition I just had the one spotlight, which is actually shining on a sun painting that looks exactly like that spotlight, but you can't see that in the photo. So for this show, what I did was I curated a show of Plato's cave where all the different things in the allegory of the cave, like the shadows, the cave, the philosopher, the sun, the people in chains that look at the shadows and get confused, all those were represented by objects that people made. So I would call people up or whatever, like Mary. I said, Mary, can we use your cave? Your cave will be the cave in the cave of the allegory of the cave. And you know, my friend Roger White did the sun painting. I said, can we have your son play the role of the sun in the allegory? So this is that show. And here are a couple of hermits that I put in the cave. This is a hermit by Dave Kearns on the right, and then a hermit by John Plipchuk there on the bottom. So, and then this is actually Sebastian Smee, the Pulitzer Prize winning critic at the Globe. And he would be mortified if he knew, but he made this dumb face for me. So what I did was, on top of doing the show, I had each of the people in the show write from the point of view of the shadow, the sun, the philosopher, the book, all these different people. They had to write a kind of theatrical monologue. So then we published that in a book, and so this is the characters in the allegory of the cave get to speak. And the lights were off, so I had this miner's light that you put on, and Sebastian had his bike light on, and so he put the miner's light on his bike helmet, rather, and then he had a drawing of a bike on his shirt, and the whole thing was very platonic. But this is Paper Monument. Some of you might know that I do that. Again, it was a thing. I started to think about it. It was making something that didn't exist in a different way. I really felt like the kind of magazine that I wanted to read about art didn't exist. Like I was always reading all the ones that did exist and having kind of gripes with them. And then one day, Roger and I decided that we could just make our own magazine, which was crazy, and it's something of an albatross. But we make it now, and we've made a few of them somehow. Oh, there we go. Getting ahead of myself here. So then we made the second one. That's the second one. And then we made the third one. And I mean, it's hard to describe what Paper Monument is. I guess we just wanted just very much better writing about art, and our writing that was more candid and that was more experimental and that was more carefully made and slower and all these kinds of things. So we try to do that. And we also have people, the art that's in the magazine is actually made for the magazine. It's not a picture of something that was somewhere else. It's made for the 7 by 10 inch format, and the artists get 4 pages to do what they want. And it doesn't run with any text or anything unless they put that in the 4 pages. So that's Paper Monument, and we're about 2 years behind on the 4th one, which is about to come out. And we started, well, once we realized we could make magazines, then we wanted to make some books. So we made this book, which is called I Like Your Work, art and etiquette. I mean, people think when they now there's this annoying thing with Paper Monument where people think they know what it is, and they oh, you guys are the ones that like do funny stuff about the art world. But I mean that is true sometimes, but I think what we really do is actually, I've been trying to think about it. We take things that people talk about, that we know people talk about, that we know people care about, that doesn't appear in print, it doesn't appear on the public record, it doesn't sort of surface to that level, and we do that. We make it appear in print. So etiquette in the art world is this thing that's extremely painful and nebulous and odd and quirky and all these different things, and everybody's talking about it and asking for advice and calling people on the phone and whatever. And we just decided, wouldn't it be better if there was like a book that everyone would have in their bathroom and you could, you know, you could read it. Or we had this, we did it like the same size as the Zagat guide, so it's like you could fit it in your pocket. So this was the and in fact, when they did the Declaration of the Occupation of New York City, they used the exact same graphic design and format, and now everyone accuses us of stealing it, but we were like 3 years ahead, and they obviously like were paying us tribute. So just for the record. And then we decided that the first book was actually too cheesy and popular and light and whatever, so we wanted to make a more serious book that would be less popular or something, because the first book, like USA Today wrote about it, and that was like somehow exciting but terrifying to us that like it was working that way. So we made this other one, and this is something that came up because I was teaching a lot, and the kind of dilemma that I was having, and I knew a lot of other people were having too, was that you could be a good teacher who spent all their time focusing on teaching and was a good teacher who didn't make very much work or didn't make very good work or whatever, and sort of lived vicariously or through your students. Or you could be a person who concentrated on their work and was a shitty teacher and you got by on your legend or whatever. And it just, I mean, you all know, I'm not going to name names or anything, but so everybody knows that these are these kind of things, but that was not acceptable to me. I wanted something different, and I knew other people that wanted something different, and I kept thinking, well, what is it that would involve? How is that possible? How might that be possible? And I realized that one of the ways that it was possible, and one of the things that everybody traded like they were gold, was like really good assignments, because that was actually a very efficient way of being a good teacher without you having to spend your whole life on it, you know. And so again, with the assignments, it was like, this was something that everybody talked about. Is like 10 days before the semester started, or in the middle of the semester when there was a crisis, you're on the phone. Hey, what was that? You know, that thing that you guys do? You know, or the crits are really horrible. How do I fix the crits? Or all these kinds of things. And you would hear these. Say, well, I heard Baltasar. You know, he used to, you know, come to class in his underwear, or some weird story, you know, and these things would get passed on. So we decided, I mean, we had some mixed feelings as usual about it, like to commit some of that oral history to a book form. So we've done that, and this is the result of that. Draw with your eyes closed, the art of the art assignment, which became number 31 on Amazon, ahead of Stieg Larsson, ahead of Bill O'Reilly. I was sitting there watching it rise, but we did not pass Dr. Seuss. So it was the other highlight was it was the second most emailed article, the review of it in the New York Times, which was great, because that's usually, you know, tennis elbow or colon cancer or whatever, and this was, you know. So we were shocked. I mean, who knew? I was like, today, everyone's telling me, oh yeah, San Francisco is really nice, except nobody cares about painting. And then look, everyone's here. You know, it's like the same thing with this. We were like, everyone cares about teaching. Everyone wants, you know, there's so many people that care about this, that want it to be good. And so it's been very heartening. And now we're making a website, so stay tuned. We got some funds to make a website. And then this is back to painting contracted, I guess. This is another big painting. What's that? 10 minutes? Oh, I'm done? Oh, I didn't hear you say 5 or 1. Oh gosh, I'm partly deaf. Sorry. So this is a bust that I made. I was like, wow, I'm coasting. I got 5 more minutes. This is a Ecuadorian bust that I made to deal, and maybe I can talk about that a little bit in the panel section. But to deal with, well, being I was born in Ecuador and then moved to the U.S. when I was 6, and I've never known how to talk about that. And then these are my new magazines. This is, which I'm going to get Kelty to be in, because I just found out she's an international Slav too. So that's one. And then this is, I'll end with this. This is Privacy magazine. So this is my lifestyle magazine about caring about privacy. Thank you.
So our next person she looks like she's about 15 years old. She's a little older than that. It's Kelty Ferris, and she was born in Kentucky and lives and works in Brooklyn. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? She received her MFA in 2006 from Yale and her BFA in 2004 from Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. Mitchell Innes and Nash in New York presented a solo show of her work in 2012. Her solo show, Man-Eaters, was on view at the Kemper Museum in Kansas City, Missouri in 2009. In addition, her paintings have been included in group exhibitions at institutions around the country, including the Kitchen in New York, the Addison Gallery, Andover, Massachusetts, the Nerman Museum, Overland Park, and the Indianapolis Museum of Art in Indiana. In addition to galleries in the U.S. and abroad, she's the recipient of both a Jacob Javits Fellowship and Rima Hort-Mann Foundation grant. Let's welcome Kelty Ferris.
Oh, hello. Well, I thought I would start by trying to unpack a particular metaphor I use a lot when I'm trying to explain my paintings to others, and maybe painting in general. I haven't quite decided whether I'm talking about myself or something more universal than that. I hope it's more than just me. But I was thinking of, my paintings are generally arranged in this spatial organization that's very it's like 1, 2, 3, very like a short, compact depth. And I think a lot about stage sets and stage designs as having that metaphor, but are working the same way. But then there's really no stage sets in my life, actually, at this point in my life. But what I do see a lot in New York City are really great storefronts that I look at, and they seem like great paintings, or they operate so much the same way that my paintings do. And so this oh yeah, that's that's the title of this talk. And so this, most of these were just taken between the coffee shop that I go to very, very regularly, at least once a day, and my studio, which I also go to at least once a day, and the very short world of thinking that happens in between. This is the liquor store, and there's something about that frontalness, and it's and also so matter of fact and straightforward, we sell liquor, and here it is on a grid, and here it is outlined by green brightness. And there's also text going across the top in red and green that's not as bright because I don't know how to take a picture. And then there's also this reflective quality and transparent quality. It's kind of like everything I want in an amazing painting, and it's right there across from my coffee shop. Some storefronts that are not as well organized, and you're actually looking at the back, which kind of goes against my thesis about why they're so great, because they're so presentational. It's like this one window. It's made to be seen from one vantage point. It's inviting you in. But this is actually the back of a bunch of Dorito chips. You get the idea. just for the sake of, because really I'm using store, and then this is an actual theater model, and I did work briefly as a theater set carpenter, metal worker for like a very short amount of time, but I do find that, I don't know, I think that love of being in that kind of place is what's fueling this. But that's not on my walk, and that's not really from in my life at this point. Yeah, like these are so amazing. I mean, this is like a Tebow. It's even it's so presentational again, and that's also what I like about this. Like it's so I don't know quite. There's an attitudinal quality that not just a spatial quality that I think is so exciting about this, that I also want to be in my paintings, and I think are in a lot of great paintings. Yeah. I mean, that's even more Tebow, but, and then that's just, I mean, just to tie it all back to me, as I feel like some pressure to do. This is a detail of my own work, and you know, one thing that has literally been driving my work forward for about the last year and a half is this idea of outlining in red. And it's not even an idea of outlining, it is outlining. And it's like this narcotic for me at the moment, and it is this opaque red that's angular, and that's you know, surrounds this very diffuse spray painted, that's slightly transparent and ephemeral, and it's amazing how like the shape will barely be there, and then you outline it, and then it's there. And so I don't know. This is, I guess, what I'm talking about is something like this illusionistic quality of my paintings. But it's a very like a 1, 2, 3 kind of step through space, sort of that I'm interested in. And then I think the contrast is that butts up against is the texture of the paintings. And you know, one person said, I think Peter Halley told me this once. He was like, I want to give him credit for this idea. It's just that he thinks that painting is still vital or interesting because we have so many images in our life, but we have no images with texture, and that's that's what a painting is a painting with texture, or a picture with texture, and texture in this moment is so. Like we're so hungry for it, and to have that up against an illusionistic space, a feeling of continuing in and through, it's so contrary to the idea of texture. And then he has this whole idea about fashion, about like how you know, rich people will pay gazillions of dollars for an amazing blouse because it'll have like the perfect texture. So he like expands on, but I don't know as much about that, but. So again, this is on my walk. So I was like, I just need some texture. And so that's on my walk between my caffeine and my studio. And the crazy thing is that it's also, I just found lots of pictures of it up against like painting as well. You know, the texture of this metal, you know, again, clearly outlined in yellow. You know. Oh, it's kind of boring. That's boring. That's a beginning of one of my paintings. And okay, you're maybe getting to see it. That's the first layer of a painting, and that's the texture of the canvas. I always make sure that stays alive through the painting, and we'll come up against the texture, of course, of the brush of each kind of mark that I use. Again, I don't know. I feel so teacherly, but when this is like just such a great example of texture and painting, and it's just again on my walk. It's these 2 different kinds of brick are taking the this silver paint differently. So, and it's, you know, a checker pattern of the different kind of brick. One is more absorbent than the other. And then, of course, you have the texture of the concrete, the mortar. And yeah, that just makes that so much. There it is. And that's when I've tried teaching. I'm trying to get my students to notice this in their own work. So. Oh yeah, and this is also on my walk. I mean, it's just so great that this is there. This is part of this incredible mural it's a tortilla factory, and they've done a whole like corn field with workers. It's incredible. I should have taken a picture of the whole mural, but that didn't really illustrate my point. Again, it's just this the texture is of itself, and then the illusion is of itself, and they're at odds together. I don't know. I just think that's one of the most exciting natures of painting. Yeah, that painting. So this. Well, you know, how much time do I have?
You've got 1 minute and 5 seconds.
Ooh. All right. That's what I make. This is at the height of me being really excited about this outlining process. I spray paint. This painting is in real life is just a little bit smaller than this. Most of my work is 80 inches tall, which is exactly that tall. Because I make the stage to fit me, obviously, and what I do. I mix my own spray paint. It's not really spray paint, it's oil paint through a gun, and it's an addictive process because I get my colors a lot more bright and extreme that way. A lot of people think it's day glow, but it is just cadmium. It's just the old-fashioned stuff. Again, and I hope you kind of see what I've been talking about. It's just like these, there's this acrylic layer, this hot pink and red in this painting mostly. That's like the back of the stage set, and then there's this next layer that, you know, maybe some sort of scrim of the stage set that's passing back and forth, and then the actor maybe is, oh gosh, I'm like beating this metaphor to death. I don't really like it actually. Moving on. In fact, I've actually like been up against these metaphors and not like them. Maybe I'm just supplanting another one. One that people have talked about in the past about my work is that I'm like the painter, the abstract painter of the city and the cityscapes and city lights. And I never thought of it that way. I wasn't really against it, but I didn't ever. That's not really. I don't really come from that kind of beginning. I mean, I don't actually think metaphorically like I'm presenting it right now. But I did have a moment when I was like, well, if you're going to say that if that's how it's going to be read, then I'm just going to take on that. And I was like, who is the granddaddy of painting the cityscape? And that would be Mondrian and Broadway Boogie Woogie. And so I just accepted it and took it and did it. And then I have like 3 more, and I'll just show them. Voila. Voila.
Are you guys hearing in the back? Okay. The next person is Vincent Fecteau. His bio is about 1 sentence long, the one that he handed to me. So we'll add a couple little other things. Vincent Fecteau grew up in Long Island, New York, graduated from Wesleyan University, and lives and works in San Francisco. He will be participating in the Carnegie International this fall, and will have a show of his new work at Matthew Mark's Gallery in New York City in May 2014. He also had a solo show at Daniel Buchholz in Berlin in 2012, and he's been in both the 2002 and 2012 Whitney Biennials. And he had a solo show at the Art Institute of Chicago in 2008. Let's welcome Vince Fecteau.
Thank you. I'm going to be reading this, so I apologize, but that's... So this and the next 4 slides are all image of the same piece of mine from my last show in Germany. I haven't done a lecture like this in a really long time. I don't like talking in front of large groups of people, let alone about something as difficult to talk about as art. It's not made any easier by the fact that the art we're talking about is not here. Obviously, we are looking at images of things. That's not to say there's nothing interesting about the digitized equivalency of these images, just that I think it's very different than talking about actual objects. I'm not a painter. I'm probably best described as a sculptor, though I never took a sculpture class in school. I studied painting and architecture, and probably in defiance of my painting advisor, produced a senior show consisting of sewn fabric objects hung on the wall and no paintings. Since then, I've made some collages, lots of sculptures, and some wall works, but nothing that could comfortably be described as painting. But I love painting. I think about it and enjoy looking at it more often than I do sculpture. Although there are aspects of sculpture, like its insistent refusal of the image, that I continue to find very compelling, there are things about it that I find kind of embarrassing. It exists so fully in the real world, so directly related to our environment, and so completely observable that it feels a bit exposed with no secrets or illusions. I wish I could be a painter, but I don't think that way. I don't draw either. I think, for better or worse, that I think three-dimensionally. The following talk is my personal and rather unserious attempt at negotiating a relationship between painting and sculpture in the context of interior decoration, which is another subject of great interest for me. I'll be showing a couple images of my work, a bunch of other people's work I admire, and some random images, many of which I collected years ago when I was making collages using pages from interior design magazines. This is a photograph by Louise Lawler called Pollock and Tureen, arranged by Mr. and Mrs. Burton Tremaine, Connecticut, 1984. It could also be simply described as an image of part of a painting and a sculpture. Representations of Pollock-like drop claws proved irresistible to advertising agencies wanting to add something painterly in their campaigns. I suspect it was an attempt to give very institutional-looking furniture a bit more creative edge. And in turn, these advertisements proved irresistible to me. This is an example of an early collage of mine. The photograph is found, my intervention being the line joining the 3 chairs and the pushpin holding to the wall. Just to bring your attention to some of the problems with talking about objects in this way, the actual size of this piece is 7 by 8 inches. That's it at scale, or approximate. Ad Reinhardt famously said, "Sculpture is something you bump into when you back up to look at a painting." I've also seen this quote attributed to Barnett Newman, but that makes less sense to me, as Newman was a sculptor as well as a painter, and I don't have a photo of someone not looking at a Newman painting. But how did sculpture end up in the middle of the room to be bumped into in the first place? My extremely informal and wholly unreliable research via interior design magazines suggests the domestic setting as the place of origin for this never-ending negotiation between painting and sculpture. The painting in this image is by Alexander Ross, untitled 2007. Maybe we start by simply describing a sculpture, as a painting that fell to the floor. This is Lily van der Stoker, Loan, 2003. Was it due to an act of violence? Peter Saul, Stuck, 2007. Linda Benglis, Contraband, 1969. Or was it suicide? John Wesley, Bumps Down Out the Window, 2000. Linda Benglis, Eat Meat. Personally, I like to believe the descent was a bit more graceful. With heels firmly on the ground, painting could now be called sculpture. Or was it furniture? Jessica Jackson Hutchins Settee, 2010. Richard Archwager, Table with Pink Tablecloths, 1964. John Wesley, I'll Dream You in My Seas, 1965. Sometimes the confusion was the fault of the painter, as in this example, where the late, great Ralph Humphreys literalized the idea of the painting as a window and ends up with something very sculptural. This is Thin Edge, 1981. Or in this case, where Lily van der Stoker averts the painting over the sofa problem by including the sofa as part of the painting. And then, of course, there is the chicken and egg conundrum. In these next two images of Guston paintings in a living room and a bedroom, I was struck by the possibly problematic rhyming relationship of the pillows with the hooded figures in the painting. And this photograph, and this is not Louise Lawler, by the way. And this photograph of a Guston over a bed leads us to Guston's own painting of the artist in bed. This is called Couple in Bed from 1977, and for scale. The bed, it turns out, is the site of the most active negotiation between painting and sculpture, which makes a lot of sense if you consider a sheet a blank canvas awaiting stains. This is a photograph by Louise Lawler titled Monogram of a Jasper Johns painting over a bed. And this is the famous Rauschenberg combine where the sculpture or the bed becomes a painting, and side by side. A John Wesley painting called Sleeping Porch. An early Jessica Stockholder where, again, like the Rauschenberg, the mattress assumes a painterly role. This movement from wall to floor, from painting to sculpture, and back again is most literally manifest in the Murphy bed, coincidentally invented in San Francisco in 1900 by one William Lawrence Murphy. Here we see clearly how a painting can very simply become a sculpture, and vice versa. And here, demonstrated by two different pieces by Sarah Lucas, one assuming a more painterly orientation, and the other definitely more sculptural. As a means of some conclusion, I'd like to show a series of images that I think demonstrates an oscillation between the real and the represented, the abstract and the figurative, the artist and the decorator, and of course between painting and sculpture. Here is a 1964 sculptural installation by Klaus Oldenburg called Bedroom Ensemble. This is David Hockney's actual foyer in the house of his Hollywood, probably 80-something, courtesy Architectural Digest. This is a Hockney in someone else's house. This is a David Hockney painting of a bed, and one might argue a sculpture. And to end with a 2001 sculpture of mine, possibly on the floor of that bedroom, that a friend once described as looking like a pair of dirty underwear. Thank you.
So our next artist is Keith Mayerson, who arrived this morning at 3:15 a.m. Keith, thank goodness for coffee. Keith Mayerson was a semiotics and studio art major at Brown University and received his MFA from University of California, Irvine in 1993. He's in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, New York, Museum of Contemporary Art, LA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Columbus Museum of Art, the Corcoran Gallery, and the Whitney Museum. He teaches at the School of Visual Arts, where he's also the cartooning coordinator, and this year is an assistant professor at Columbia University. He currently lives in New York City and has a cabin home in Riverside, where he and his husband were married. Let's welcome Keith Mayerson.
Well, thanks, everybody. I have to say I'm truly honored to be part of this milieu and hopefully in a good energy, kumbaya way, talking about painting and all issues surrounding the art discourse. It's amazing what's happening at this school, and I really feel privileged and proud to be part of it. So thanks for inviting me. It's amazing. So also, you know, in 1993, I had my debut. I went to UC Irvine for my graduate work, and Rick Jacobson was able to see that work and brought it up to the Kiki Gallery, which was a seminal gallery that happened just a few blocks away from here that really like shook things up in a great way, and Vincent was part of it, and a lot of good people, and so it's neat 20 years later to come back and be in the hood with this work. Now, this is, I'm going to take you through a show called My American Dream, and it's a show that's going to happen in just 2 weeks. It's just around the corner for me at Derek Eller Gallery in New York City, and so if you're in town around, I hope you can make it. If not, hopefully I could take you through the show, the first image of which, of course, is this one of Obama and his family on the eve of his re-election, as printed in the New York Times on their front page, and was called Obama's Night was the headline, and so that's the title of the painting. 4 years ago, right before he was elected last time, I had that picture of him in front of the Capitol going like this, and I was so happy that he won, but I always feel like a show begins with your invite, and the idea is that you want to try to get that poster on the refrigerator door. And in my humble, small way, I want to help Obama, of course, but it was interesting that how some conservatives wrote in to Derek or called and said, please take me off the mailing list forever. So that was kind of sad, but I'm glad that he was reelected. I always wanted to do a picture of his family, and I was waiting for this moment. And, you know, I feel my job as an artist is, especially when I'm working from photographs, which I do, it's one of the few appropriate images in the show, is to transcend the photo and really think my thoughts about what it means to me while I'm painting the picture, try to get in the head of the people that I'm painting if it's somebody well known. And so in this case, I was listening to a lot of Stevie Wonder, a lot of music that Obama liked, really thinking about my thoughts about him and the campaign and how unfortunately divisive he is in this country. And I think, you know, the job of history painting sometimes when it's good is to have some sort of energy or emotion or some sort of transcendence and aesthetic value that goes beyond the image itself, which hopefully happens here. And you know, Picasso said, if you draw a circle without an aid of a compass, its imperfection is your style, or if you're copying the old masters, how it's not like the old masters is what is you about it. And so hopefully what is not like the photo is what's me about it, and hopefully it goes into another world beyond just celebrating Obama, although I think he's awesome with his foot going into the future. And so My American Dream could be read ideologically, but I also think of it a little bit literally. I'm mixing in here like I've done in shows in the past since my Brown thesis show and a show called at Jay Gorney, where I was mixing figurative with representational, and also Hamlet 1909. At Derek Eller in 06, abstract ones with figurative ones, trying to bring out what is abstract in terms of the figurative elements breaking down into abstraction, and then these abstract ones trying to bring out the figure. I'm a son of a psychoanalyst, and so I have a penchant for the unconscious. And I think, you know, postmodernity necessarily took us away from the track of Picasso and modernity and Freud. But exploring through Duchamp and Marx different ideas of work that stands outside of itself and relates to the outer world, I think we're in a really good place now. I think we're sort of in a postmodern age where you could have your cake and eat it too, and make work that's hopefully about something, but also something that relates to something outside the world. And yet, maybe there's a time and space for a sort of an interiority to come out, and I still don't think we figured out what dreams are about, what images from dreams look like. And you know, when I look at Cézanne paintings, there's always like a Cézanne hole, I call it, right in the middle of the painting, where if you look and scrutinize, you could see that that's where Cézanne probably had his head when he was painting it, because you could see his eyes and his nose and his beard and his teeth. And in this one, like I could totally see like my eyes and nose and that hopefully just came out subconsciously while I was realizing this painting. Which is juxtaposed to this painting. This is, of course, the Statue of Liberty. I wanted to always paint this picture, and I took a picture of it on the Staten Island ferry with students last year, but then I went with my husband on a boat the day before Labor Day, and it felt more pertinent and real to take this picture then. There was a storm brewing, as it were, behind her. And, you know, when I was painting it, I really thought about what the immigrants must have felt about liberty and the Statue of Liberty, seeing this giant mammoth statue from France coming into America. And, you know, more importantly, I was trying to think about what it means to me to be free, whatever that is, and American, independent. And, I try to live through my paintings. I don't think art is necessarily therapy, but I think we're always hopefully living through our work and hopefully getting something forward with it. And I don't know, I was resolving a lot of problems in my own life. And I think in a weird way, there was that viral photo that came out after Hurricane Sandy of the Photoshop Statue of Liberty, and so maybe this was sort of prescient for the storm that was about to occur. But certainly at this time, during the elections and the debate and the recession, I was hoping that America can make it through it, and luckily it did. Hopefully it will survive, as we will. This is next to this painting, which again, I hope the figurative elements kind of come out. I think, Picasso and Braque were building a science from Cézanne doing Cubism, and then the Abex artists from New York were building a science on that. And then we were sort of taken on a different track. But I don't know. I think that I want to try to paint these sort of more than Gorky, trying to get into a plastic space. It's sort of more of a Renaissance space without illustrating it like Dali. So hopefully it's sort of working here, and hopefully going underneath sort of the pathos or the ideas of what was happening in the more figurative works. This is right next to that. This is from the top of the rock. In '99, Andrew and I lived on 46th Street in this loft that was unfortunately above a mob's bordello, which was not a cool thing. And we were really depressed about that. We were moving some stuff for the floor guys, and something fell on our poodle puppy and killed her. I know. And so we fell into this big depression, and to escape, I would go up on the roof of our 46th Street apartment and paint the buildings and paint Rockefeller Center, which is, of course, is the GE building. Thinking about the power of that, but in my bohemian anxiety, wanting to break it apart to abstraction and try to, find my own agency in the painting of these things. Now, fast forward 13 years later, I feel a lot better, and I wanted to get to the top of the building and paint south, looking back at my past, and paint the Empire State Building, which for me still gives me this hopefully not too cheesy romantic feeling about New York and all the possibilities I could have, and the City of Lights. And I'm totally relating to you because I'm hoping that it sort of breaks into Broadway boogie woogies as I get into the micromanaging of this and sort of break it back into abstraction too. And so as the exhibition continues in the project space, this is sort of James Dean territory. This is of Fairmont, Indiana, the sky of Fairmont, where James Dean was raised. And when we went there, it was really amazing that the lights of GOD were just crashing through the clouds. Seriously, I felt like we felt something, maybe we were driving too long, or I didn't have enough coffee that day. But I really felt this. James Dean as a cultural icon, I think, was sort of like a pop culture, Jesus, or a sort of a living Buddha. I don't know if you guys know that he was gay or sort of Hollywood bisexual, and he really wanted to change culture. He really wanted to be sort of a titan of art and be on Mount Olympus along with Picasso and Michelangelo. And in the 3 movies that he made, he died when he was just 24, he really did do that. He was the first person to give a voice to a youth culture. Elvis became Elvis because of James Dean. John Lennon said he was influenced by James Dean and be John Lennon. So in some ways, he helped begat rock and roll with a lot of other people. And I don't think, there would be Justin Timberlake or Justin Bieber without James Dean, so for whatever that's worth. This is sort of, sorry about the Bieber restaurant. Okay, maybe you guys are Bieber, okay, never mind. This is hanging next to that, and I'm really hoping that this brings out all the faces and things that I see in the sky or in the snowy ground around there, and I think the more you look, the more that you see. And then that's juxtaposed to this. This is James Dean's house. Now owned by Marcus Winslow, who was his cousin, a little cousin, really his little brother. He was brought up by his aunt and uncle because his mom died when he was 6. And it was interesting to me painting this in that it feels like the tree on the right was really pointing to the window that James Dean was raised in, and he would jump out that window at night and go to the cemetery next door to talk to his mom, who was buried there. And he said he really saw his mom, and he would really talk to her. And the amazing thing when I was there, I kissed the grave too, but I really felt Dean's presence. It was kind of uncanny. And in painting this, I like to paint sort of thinking like a method actor. Again, I'm listening to music and and oh my gosh, and the biographies and everything, and trying to get into the world. And I saw, I listened to Little Prince, and you sort of see the Little Prince on the left, and you see the fox on the right, and James Dean in the cellophane of the flowers. His face was really sort of talking to me. This is next to these iconic paintings. I teach cartoons. I think if you dream, you see sort of icons in your dreams that probably are cartoons. And we say, oh my gosh, that's Grandpa. Next to this, sort of the sublime view from the Empire State Building looking north at, our country, hopefully as a floating island of people going into the future in the best possible way. And sort of in the Kantian sublime, I always think the secret is micromanaging everything to the macro-managed whole. And so hopefully that's happening here. Next to the view out of the Chelsea window at the 4th of July fireworks, that looks to me like a giant dragon or a UFO. Next to this giant iconscape where I think when you're paying abstraction, you're really paying the inside of your brain, and you see all the kinds of faces and forms are in it. And hopefully, like a Pollock painting, as you're trying to find the face that's buried in there, it starts to vacillate back and forth. Next to this, the eagle with the talons in here, because I was painting this through Hurricane Sandy, from the no electricity, from the light in my window, trying to carry forward, just like America hopefully is too. Next to Andrew and I, my husband's painting, I love the Rembrandt Jewish Bride. This is hopefully my homage to that when we got married the first chance we could in California. Hopefully, we just celebrated our 21st anniversary. Hopefully, America's getting smarter. Next to this picture, a bed painting, Vincent, of my family looking at this like bed knobs and broomstick from me at age 4, thinking about our future. I painted this for my dad on his 80th birthday, full of love. Hopefully, I've Oedipalized, and unlike Pinocchio, I've become a real boy just by painting my heart out with honesty and hopefully doing my thing. Thanks, you guys, for your patience.
Oh my God, I don't want this to end. Amy Bissoni, she's our final artist here, and she's going to be leaving right back to go back to LA right after the reception. Amy Bissoni was born in the Bronx, New York. She studied at Barnard College, Parsons, Paris, and the Atelier in Amsterdam. She's exhibited her work internationally with solo exhibitions in Paris, Berlin, Los Angeles, and New York. Bissoni's works have been included in group exhibitions in several institutions, including the Museum of Contemporary Art, LA, the Rubel Family Collection, Miami, the Frac Breton, the Rennie Collection in Vancouver. Her solo show at Salon 94, Bowery, New York City, opens in May this year, May 7th. She lives and works in LA. Let's please welcome Amy Bissoni.
Hi. I'm very humbled to be speaking after all these other people. I had a lot of arrow in the brain moments today, as Mary would say. My talk is called "What Time Is It?" Partly because when Linda first invited me, I didn't think I was going to be able to do this, unfortunately, because time is my most precious resource. And that has been reflected in a lot of conversations I've had here since I arrived yesterday. I thought it was partly because I'm a working mom, but I realized to be an artist and balance that with any other kind of activity is really challenging. So speaking to the students in the room, I would say get your asses in gear because you have no idea what it's like when you leave art school and you try to figure out that equation between money, time, space, and energy. It's really challenging, and looking back, I wish I'd made a bit more of the time, the protected time I had in an institution. Yeah. Yeah, having kids definitely warps out your sense of time because they don't know how to, my children don't know how to read a clock yet, so you're just sort of like in charge of someone else's existence, which is a little scary for them, I'm sure, that I'm in charge of it. So I think Linda hoped I would have some insight into how to balance being a parent and being married to another artist, and trying to make my own work. And I always come back to the concept of triage. I basically spent most of my teenage years watching MASH reruns. But this is a really valuable concept. Just giving up on the hopeless cases, attending to the immediate needs of those who might survive, and then working your way down to the less urgent issues. So zooming out on the sense of time, I made a timeline. This was a few weeks ago, and I can't really recall exactly what I was thinking when I made this timeline. I'm sure it was brilliant. But every time I pick up a magazine or newspaper, I'm always like I feel like I'm a mouse click away from someone reminding me that it was 50 years ago that the feminine mystique came out. And just sort of breaking it down by decades, I feel very hopeful. At the same time, I feel a tremendous sense of urgency in that there's so much work to be done, not just for women, for human beings in general. But this is a little bit of a kind of feminist timeline, my interpretation of it. Oh yeah, that was what I was going to say. I lost 2003 somewhere between trying to buy a minivan and making a pediatrician's appointment, which I only figured out when I went back and looked and saw I had no images from 2003. But this is 2003 for me. I like the Warrior Bride, and Beatrix Kiddo, the Uma Thurman character, is like the best on-screen mom I can think of. And Tarantino's riffs on archetype and genre and style are important to me. I don't seem to be advancing here. Yeah, we have just 10 more years of material, so. Okay, so. Okay, thank you. Oh, okay, so this sort of is, I was thinking about the Guerrilla Girls, who I sort of became aware of just around the time I was leaving art school, and was a little bit clueless as to how challenging it was going to be. I was thinking about the idea of being a queer formalist. I think just being a woman painter in the late 80s was sort of a strange idea for a lot of people. It was one that I wasn't really sure how to, a role I didn't really know how to enact. But anyway, I think it's really hard to separate out the political, the personal, the professional, the career stuff with the art stuff. And thinking about the Guerrilla Girls, they made a lot of really explicit and interesting points to me about how women artists are supported or not supported in the art world, particularly in relation to their male peers. And this, I mean, I think these kind of charts and lists are kind of ridiculous, but it just sort of was interesting to me that when you look down, the first woman I could identify was number 39, Marlene Dumas, who I had the honor of being taught by, and I really hope that women will continue to move up the chart. Because, you know, anyway, this is some imagery of Lebbeus Woods, who has a show here at the SF MoMA, which I saw yesterday, and I was very close to him in the 80s. He was a teacher, an informal teacher of mine, and a very brilliant man, so I encourage you to see that show. And then going back to the personal, the idea of talking here about my work took me to my slide library, which I realized I'm not really in charge of anymore. There are a lot of images that are strange documents about my surroundings, my kids, my life. My kids' friends sometimes take my camera or phone and take pictures of them. And I realized looking at these pictures that my last show in Berlin, this is a piece from that, these are actually photorealist. And talking about combining parental duties with artwork, it's really hard to know when to demand a separation of church and state and when to integrate your life. And I was feeling very frustrated around the holidays when I was on a committee to do a craft table for a book fair fundraiser. And I decided to do prints with the kids, and I was in kind of a frustrated mood. And it turns out that these prints, I had to experiment to make sure I had the technique right, ended up being like the core of my next body of work. So it was not all for naught. This is a picture of my studio, and I do consider the square footage of my studio to be a political statement. And these are some of my recent paintings, which will be in the show in New York, which is going to be called In the Green Room. I guess living in LA, I've picked up a lot of entertainment lingo, like green room. And since this is Painting Expanded, here are some ceramics I'm working on. And the last thing I'm going to show are some videos. This is the world premiere, guys, of hopefully, if we're not frozen. That's good, yeah. It's all right, that's great, thank you. wanted to say this because this is just so weird. Tom LeDuc, where are you? Oh, I was born on March 29th, and my grandmother died in my arms on my 26th birthday, March 29th. So this is, I think we were the perfect brackets for this.
Thank you, PM panel. For our panel discussion, our moderators will be faculty Jordan Cantor and Linda Geary. So if I could have the house lights turned up.
Okay, thank you guys. I'm just riding this high of painting information. One thing that maybe I thought would be a place to start is among this group, but also in the group previous, there were a lot of images shown of work that seemed to relate obliquely to work that's at the center of your studio practice or the work that you're making. And images of shots on the street walking from caffeine to studio, or of interior decorator arrangements in design magazines. And I'm wondering if you guys could maybe talk a little bit about the relationship between kind of source material, or if you think of it as source material, which is to say like extraneous things that you find and collect, and the things that you make. Could you talk about that a little bit? I think that like the things that you choose to show with your work tell us very much about your work and your interests. I'm wondering if you could maybe personalize that a little bit and talk about how that's formalized in your practice.
At one point it was one-to-one. I mean, I was actually using the stuff that I was collecting. But that felt really limiting to me. So now it seems much more obliquely connected. I mean, these are things that I'm interested in, but I think I absorb stuff from everywhere. It's not. I don't have source material. I mean, I have a bulletin board that I have stuff up, and that stuff sort of seeps into the work, but only later I look at it and like, oh, that's where that shape came from, or that's where. I work backwards. I feel like I don't work forward.
Yeah, me too. I mean, if that's, am I yeah, I do not have any source material, and and I'm a terrible collector, so I don't collect anything. I'm not organized enough to collect anything. So, yeah, that's more. Those pictures are more of an explanation afterwards, trying to explain where it might come from.
I'll speak to this.
Yeah.
You know, I used to do a lot of appropriation. I would used to think of them as sort of avatars for talking about different things. And I used to love the Beatles because I felt that they were sort of a postmodern band, because it wasn't about them, it was Sgt. Pepper. It wasn't about John Lennon, it was Hey Jude. But more and more, I like the idea of like John Lennon post the Beatles speaking and singing about him and Yoko vice versa, because I felt that there was something really pertinent to that in terms of the TLC that he's bringing into the mix, and because the music's so good, because he feels a deep connection, hopefully it has more universal value. And so I used to use source material a lot, and Andrew and I are bringing in a U-Haul back to California, all this stuff, all these stacks I've been hoarding of magazines and stuff because I don't use them that much anymore. But I do think of images that are like sort of, think of this sort of as a barbershop. I have all these images in my mind, and I want to do the one that's most prevalent. And I really think that when you're using an image, when you're painting from it at least, it really is a talisman to, you know, unpack everything that you're thinking about that in terms of the emotion, in terms of the allegorical syntax of what it can mean. And I kind of think at this day and age, like I'm kind of old now, but I think you could be painting a shoe or a rock or a plant, and if it like springs something in you that makes you like bring forth this energy, then you know, you'll love it and other people love it too. Despite a lot of like sort of postmodern kind of paintings I have in my studio, one that people really gravitate to is the one of my dog Julian, who died. He was a German Shepherd, and I remember in the Rembrandt movie with Charles Laughton as Rembrandt, he's painting Saskia after she dies, and Charles Laughton, they come, they're like, Rembrandt, you have to go to the funeral. Saskia just died. He's like, no, I'm painting her while I still remember her. And so I was painting Julian when I still remembered him after he passed away. And people gravitate to the dog painting. They love it. And it's a German Shepherd and my poodle, but there's something about whatever I hopefully was able to bring to it that gave it its pertinence. And so I really think about source material a lot. And I choose it very wisely because it's the thing that I want to think about for the weeks or months that I'm painting that picture.
He brings up something I think is really interesting, though, and I was thinking about this while you were talking. And it seems to me more and more that form seems almost irrelevant. Like it's this idea of intention. It seems like you're talking about a lot. And I was thinking about while you were talking about you talked about God, you talked about spirituality, and I think that's something that I really relate to. I think about art in this very sort of idealistic way, and that the things that we make are sort of kind of pointing to something rather than the thing itself. Like it's an attempt at rather than for me it doesn't like representational abstract painting, sculpture, performance. To me it's almost irrelevant.
And luckily there's, I think, room and space for that.
Yeah.
I think like I teach at Columbia in the grad program there, and some of the abstract painters feel guilty for doing abstract painting. Mary is like a matriarch there. I hope that's okay to say. And you're like, well, I'm doing abstract painting. I feel so bad. I'm like, don't feel bad, because there are a lot of people doing stuff that
Painter's guilt.
Yeah,
that's what I call it. Yeah.
But
There's a lot of that.
When you work with subject matter, of course, it points to things outside of it for everything. But now, because the world's not perfect, and certainly the art world's not perfect at all. But like maybe in the margins, there's that space for the interiority or the stuff that could be about not relational aesthetics outside the picture, but also the hermetics within, and having that be a meditation into another space.
I'll just say, thinking about some of those things in the bust painting that I'm making, because I had this problem of, having grown up in Ecuador and then moving to the U.S., not being able to account for that or even explain it or tell that story in any way that made sense to people, because the visuals, for even just the visuals, would be foreign to almost anybody, and then the experience would be, foreign to a lot of other people too. And I ended up doing a lot of like kind of research of source material, because I was trying to evoke the way that painting is made is that it's like a kind of Ecuadorian vernacular structure of a bus where they paint, on the back of a bus, all these different things, but then I'm putting in all these things that I've experienced since I left. And so it's that kind of thing, exactly what Vincent was talking about, a kind of pointing to something that's missing or that's not possible in the regular world of objects, but making it happen in another kind of alternative world of objects. And I ended up actually doing a lot of research about funny things like chrome lettering from the 70s, and the colors that, industrial colors of paint that were used in Ecuador in the 70s and things like that. So I found myself doing a lot of research into that kind of source material to make those things.
I would like to know, can you guys, I want to hear more about painter's guilt and maybe just because I think we all know what that is. And in the context of being in an institution where it's sort of maybe kind of comes through, different voices that have to do with faculty or peers, but how have you experienced that? And Kelty, maybe you could go first since you brought it up.
Yeah, no, I think I was telling, I've met, for instance, I've met people, or I'll go and teach for a day, and I'll meet the students ahead of time, and I'll say, just tell me what you do, and people say, oh, I make objects and performances, and I collect, da-da-da-da, and then I go to their studio, and I'm like, oh, there's like 20 paintings in here, and one's on a door, or to me, it's paint. I would say, if I had been them, I am a painter. That it seems 100% coming out of a painting vernacular. So I've seen people sort of twist what they do away or how they name it, and I think there's something very I mean, it is current. I mean, look how many people are here and how interested you guys seem, at least. It's happening. You know, it's alive, obviously. But there's something that does it, that we're always suspecting that it's not alive, or that it's old-fashioned, or it's for rich people, or it's for white people, or it's for men, and you know, all these things that are heaped onto it by really antiquated notions that people bring into their studio, and then feel bad about wanting to make a painting. And it's clearly, when I talk to students, I'm just like, well, what do you want to do? And what, there has to be just as much looking inward as looking outward to the culture. So.
Yeah. Just to tack on a couple of things to that idea, I think part of it comes from the fact that we live in a society which prizes the rational and the logical, and I mean, I guess since the Enlightenment, there's this move towards basically
in that direction.
And the idea, I don't know, sometimes I come across people who somehow have this idea that a sort of very literal, linear, scientific knowledge is ultimately superior to other kinds of intelligence or knowledge. Totally. And so there's this idea somehow that if you're engaged with a material, that it precludes you having any sort of intellectual debate or responsibility going on as well. So I think one thing I felt when I first came out of art school is that I somehow had to prove that my paintings were conceptual in order for them to be legitimate. But I mean, you look at that Holbein painting. Was that Tom again who showed that? I mean, that's the greatest piece of conceptual art as well as an extraordinary painting. And so I think this sort of false dichotomy between the physical, the formal, the visual, the sensual, and the intellectual came up through decades or centuries of culture. And so you're kind of, I think as a painter in this day and age, we have to reconcile that or acknowledge that those things can coexist within one artwork that might just be oil on canvas or whatever. But at the same time, the further I go on, I feel like it's sort of, I mean, of course, just being an artist in general is a totally absurd thing to do, let alone creating a space or fighting really, really hard to have a space to make that stuff. So I guess that's what I meant when I was saying I think my studio is in a way a political statement. All of that square footage is devoted to this absurd thing that is not devoted to linear thought, obviously, or making guns or whatever else could be done in that space. I say that because I mean, aside from anti-war sentiments, my studio used to be a shooting range. Anyway, I'm digressing, but I think that's where that kind of like self-conflicted feeling comes for a lot of painters.
Yeah, also that feeling that a painting is always a painting is always art, and it's very hard to make a painting that is not art, and therefore it's hard to question what art. It's a very difficult tool now in this day and age to use to question what art is, whereas other photography or other mediums do that better. And I think when people want to claim an outsider status, it's a difficult place to work from in that way.
I'll tell you, at Columbia, it's kind of just interesting because there's like a zeitgeist too of the objectified painting, painting as sculpture, painting in different textures, as well as that sort of abstraction thing that's happening in a good way. But sometimes I always say like sort of the motivated abstraction is really important in terms of having a meditation and not making it abstraction in quotes or decorative, to actually have it be contemplative. I mean, the politics come into play, I think, really from a lot of ideas of postmodernity that a lot of the students have had, that sometimes they swarm in on the painters and they do make them feel guilty of like, why are you participating in this? again, you know, like in the sort of like decades now old kind of debate, and then they have to really fight and substantiate why they're painting, which is probably good to be able to say like, okay, I'm painting for this reason, and to make it stand. But it's funny, like in crit, sometimes like a woman just a few weeks ago painted on a sweater, and a lot of the other students could only talk, they loved that painting the most, but they talked about the material aspects of the sweater, the sides of it, everything. But there are all these Marston Hartley moments that were happening on top of it. So after half an hour, I'm like, well, what do you think about the meditation of the formal aspects of what's happening on the surface of it? And like, let's start talking about that. And so environment, I think, comes into play in the ADHD, internet kind of world. I kind of think, too, like the idea of painting as contemplation goes out the window because people aren't willing to sit down and like look at something, like vacillate and push and pull, and then just the idea that paintings should open up like a flower. They take time. And then in the making of them, too, they require sometimes that idea of like a meditation that you could like sort of sit still with. But I think, you know, if you're painting with a brush, with oil paint especially, there is something of sort of the Jedi Knight scenario where we're doing something that is about scanning what's happening in your brain and not controlling ultimately the ultimate effect of what comes out. It's something that's different from photography and other means, in that it really is accessing your unconscious with a flick of your brush that's faster than your consciousness can ascertain, and that's something I think we could bring to the table still.
And just kind of following off that, I think the other, I can go on and on about this, sorry, but like, the idea of pleasure, I mean, painting is inherently pleasurable. I mean, that's what it's about, and you're claiming your joy of that, and you're claiming your indulgence in that by, and you're claiming that it's interesting to other people. And by showing it, so there's a lot of guilt to forge through, to do it and to show it.
I don't know if anyone else has this experience, but I feel like the older I get, I'm realizing that there's only so much I can do. I mean, this is it's not like this is a choice. It's not like, oh, I could do dance or perform. I couldn't. I mean, and I actually think like being an artist is actually finding out who you are. And then so finally, as I get older and older, I'm like, oh, my limitations become clearer and clearer and clearer, and that's it. It's like, I wish I could be a painter, but I can't. You know, I won't ever be a painter, or make paintings that people would call paintings.
So I would think you have that formal contemplative moment where you're mixing things and blending things and putting and like
cutting and changing. That's the thing.
That interior kind of feeling that's coming out. That makes it work. So
I'm just going to disagree with everyone. I don't think painting is inherently pleasurable. I don't think it's special in any of those ways. I don't think that it's the thing that I was made to do or that I will end up finally doing. I have totally different feelings about it, which I guess there's room for that too. For a long time, when I did other things, for example, curate a show or write an essay or make a magazine or whatever, I had actually the opposite of painter's guilt. I had the other things guilt or whatever it would be. But I think actually that that guilt is often kind of a divining rod, actually. So I think that it should be felt often, and people should use it to see what it's pointing to, because it oftentimes is pointing to a serious question. And I do think that as pleasurable as it is to get surrounded by all painters and think about how great it is and all of its potential, I think there are a lot of questions about what painting can do and about what position it should take that I think are serious and not you know, I'm not sure they're that fun to think about or related to pleasure often. I actually think that they have a lot of deep, kind of ugly side to it. So yeah, thank you.
Well, you know, it's funny because we joke, some of the teachers is like, you know, they say sometimes painting is dead in, you know, the academy, but then once you go in the galleries, of course, painting could be very alive because that's the first thing that sells, because people need stuff on their wall, especially wealthy people. That's sort of that's the butter of a lot of galleries. And yet I think the danger is the irresponsibility about putting things that are merely decorative or just the candy that makes the rich person happy and enforces, you know, the sort of John Berger kind of ideas of like making them feel better about themselves in a non-contemplative, critical way. And I think there is a responsibility there, you know. I think like in the meditation of pleasure, hopefully it could be a sort of a beautiful thing or a sublime thing where as you, like the armchair Matisse quote, you know, I'm an optimist, but I like to think that he's thinking like, well, if this Russian collector buys his work and he's looking at those colors fit together in this way, you know, maybe that's like this mathematical problem that he could allegorize for the problems of his world and put the pieces in his world together and go out there and make it a better place. But I think responsibility is really important when it comes to painting, especially because it is such a pleasurable object that could go out there in the world and be easily commodified. But sometimes the best work is the least commodifiable.
Mm-hmm. And just to disagree with you, I think there are so many collectors who collect trophies which are not oil on canvas, and it's so easy to commodify anything now that I don't think painting necessarily anymore holds a special scarlet letter for being like the most marketable thing. I mean, yeah, people like that. It has a sort of traditional value, but anything can be commodified.
Dushko, I just wanted you to go on a little bit more because it seemed like you stopped right where, if you could kind of maybe go a little further.
If I could just
it seems
explain
like
it
there's
all.
a lot of good information.
Yeah, I don't totally know. I mean, it's to do with, I forget where I was, because then it's hard, because then you start trying to listen to the next person. And
so, like when you were talking about guilt points to some good things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, because, yeah, if you're feeling guilty, I mean, oftentimes maybe you should get over it or something like that. But oftentimes it's a very useful, you know, like I said, like a divining rod. It's a finger pointing at something, you know. And I think the same thing is true of boredom. You know, I think people were talking about boredom. I think it's also a very good, like, sort of finger pointing at something. And then, you know, how you deal with it, you know, matters a lot. Did this just go off? But it's not particularly the commodity thing of it, too. I mean, and you're right. I don't think painting is as special or as high status as the people who would want to attack it, like, sort of make it, you know. Definitely not. I think iPhones and digital images are much more powerful and fetishized and within the culture at large. But I do think, I mean, I think the irrelevance of painting, too, I think is really a serious question for everybody. I mean, you know, and I say that from the inside, you know, as a painter. I think it is hard. I think it's a hard language to use to make contact with, you know, bigger questions. I think the people we've seen today it's good. It feels like everybody's trying, but I don't think it's necessarily like you know, yeah, like painting isn't dead, but I don't know, you know, it's you know, it's sometimes it's you know, you can worry, or I worry, but yeah, not because I think painting should go on forever. I mean, I think if it should die, it will die, you know, but yeah.
But I don't even understand what that would mean if painting died. Like, would that mean no one would paint, or would that mean? I mean, that's,
no, I think it would
like
just wouldn't be important. You know, it wouldn't be significant. It would be like, I don't know.
But I don't even know what that would mean. Like, what does it mean? Like, something's not significant. Does that mean it doesn't show in galleries, or does that mean it's not? I mean, but I don't. I mean, it's significant. Like, these things. That's what I actually think that these things hold this intention. Like, I don't think that they're. I think there's energy in them, and I don't know if that can be sort of. It seems to, for me, it seems to go beyond this kind of intellectual, like, figuring out of how it. I don't know if I can articulate this properly.
You know, I think what's interesting for me about ideas of postmodernity, which I really think in large part was a movement started by women, people of different orientation too. If you think about Johns and Rauschenberg, and then open the window for people of color and all this debate. I always think like before this period, there was like painting and sculpture, maybe drawing and nothing else, and a lot of the stuff that would circulate in art history and the art world was all done by like the white guys that said that they were straight. I think, of course, the world's not perfect now, and like I think your chart was really illuminating, actually, in terms of like building upon what the Guerrilla Girls were talking about in the 70s and the 80s. But I think what's nice about postmodernity is that it just sort of took painting off the mantle of the hierarchy, and now painting is just another option or a choice that gives you a certain, thing that you could do. It's sort of like rock and roll in the current moment. Like rock and roll is not dead, and yet hip hop and these other things have sort of taken up equal space. And so if you're about doing one thing, you could do this or another thing. I will say, like I went to Sunnyside. Is that the place in Palm Springs where the TV Guide people, is it Sunnyside?
Sunnyland.
Sunnyland. And it was interesting in their slideshow for that place because, of course, they had all the things that are now at the Met, of the Cézannes and the Monets and the Gauguins all around there, and they would invite the Reagans in. They were obviously Republican, but they would also have Democrats come in there too, and they really wanted ideas of debate and in a good, productive way to bring the nation in a better place. But they were surrounded by these paintings. And I realized, like, OMG, like these paintings are like the soul that is reminding them what's important in the real world. Despite all the politics involved with all those pictures, there was something edifying about her. I saw this, I was Googling Cézanne and watched a video of Ann Timken interviewing Rockefeller about the Cézannes he was bequeathing to the MoMA show. And here's Rockefeller, one of these, titan, powerful people in the world surrounded by these Cézannes that he really had a deep connection to, you could tell. And I was glad that he had them because maybe it reminded him about not to, abuse his power. Like, I kind of think, like, if painting is about depicting a soul, like, it reminds people. I mean, I'm sorry to go there, but
when I brought up pleasure, I was not thinking of the rich guy in the armchair or any viewer actually, or I was talking about the pleasure, like my pleasure, the pleasure of the maker, and I think it's whether that's real or not, whether it happened or not, and in my case it does happen, and it's kind of the centerpiece of my life, really. Whether that I think I see that when people value painting in any way, it's because they see it as a pleasurable moment for me. and it's like, it's almost like they're jealous. And that's what that looks at, and and that's, I guess, the aura and the mystique of being an artist. It's the people like imagine what that might be like and what it might be like to make that. And that's what these objects are that aren't transparent. Where they're making and their production is not transparent. They're like, oh, someone made this for a reason that I don't know why, and I think they did it with great pleasure,
so
or great emotion maybe,
that painting
or great need.
Performance.
And that's why, that's the performative, and that's why it's I think like an antidote to everything else right now. So I'm gonna make it a big statement. It's an antidote to everything.
It seems like Dushko has another point of view.
I take pleasure in all sorts of things, and I don't think, I guess I also don't, I don't even think of painting as like a particular dependable unit of with certain characteristics that gives one access to all these different things I'm hearing said, I think are true, but they would be equally true for me of, music or speech or seeing a friend or magazines or going on the internet. Maybe that's the point of Painting Expanded, is that it's would expand so much that you wouldn't even know what it was. I mean, I guess, and that's a state of being that, I mean, I always encounter it as a question, like what is it even? And someone said, I forget now because it's all kind of blurring together for me, but about there's not that much painting or something like that, but so many things are painted, you'd be surprised, like all the buildings in the world, like San Francisco, all the cars, you know, like I've been thinking about this, you know, Painting Expanded, like why the heck am I involved with that, or you know, why would I be invited to that, you know? But and then what does it mean, like in its broadest terms? And I've actually had a very good experience in San Francisco. Well, like I said, everyone was telling me like, oh, nobody cares about painting in this town, and then everything is painted. It's unbelievable. Like you start to have to find the things that are not painted. Like if you go out into the outside world, like I was in the Mission, and like signs were painted, windows were painted, the buildings were painted, the cars were painted, people's faces were painted. Everything. Painting was like expanding everywhere, and it's funny too, the phrasing, and I mean, I'm incredibly grateful to be here and to be a part of this, but the framing of it is so curious to me, because it's like painting expanded within this very small world that we think of as what painting is, and then there's all this painting going on. I find it very interesting, like how do you categorize it? How do you experience it? Why do you give one thing a certain status, another thing doesn't have a status? I mean, it's something I think about as being from Ecuador too, like what's my painting tradition? You know, what is that tradition? And would anybody recognize it? Would anybody be able to recognize it? And so I don't know, I guess I just think of it, yeah, maybe it's dispersed or something like that, and operating in so many different ways. I mean, even just I mean, I was walking around with a friend looking at the murals, and there are all these different ways that painting is, yeah, so try it out when you leave.
You know, I want to say just, I think they're all different kinds of paintings, as you say, and you know, I think it's ideas of motivation, and some are more directed, you know, if you're painting a building, or like the idea of you know, I teach in cartooning illustration SVA too, and like the idea of like something that's merely illustrative could be a negative thing even in that world, in that if it doesn't have a life of its own, it seems just merely descriptive or something, and that usually is the artist really doesn't, you know, care about what they're doing, or they care but in a crafty way, whereas I like the idea of art could be, you know, art isn't therapy, but I like the idea that everybody's getting something out. And in terms of the painting that I hold dear is the ones that are the meditation, where you are painting your brain, or you're thinking of problems in your world, and as you solve the problems on your canvas, as those colors or those forms come together and congeal, you also sometimes solve the problem that's in your mind. And that comes together too. And so, like, but I think this could be expanded a lot. I think Louise Bourgeois, you know, when she's like drawing circles, she's thinking about like, oh, Jean-Louis doesn't love me, but you know, Jean-Paul, he calls, and da-da-da-da, and it comes out looking like that. And like the sculpture is the same way. And so there's something, a deep investment, but it's a different kind of, you know, psychological practice. But I like to think that there's room for that. But of course, like ideas of, you know, I love everybody bringing in all different kinds of ways of using it, and not having that also have a hierarchy.
Yeah, does that come down to an issue of intention? I mean, all these things are painted, but I mean, I think that's what you were just saying, right?
Yeah.
That there's this.
Well, one's sort of a directed, okay, I'm going to paint the building red, I'm going to do a good job doing it. The other kinds of painting might be, well, I'm painting this picture, but I don't know where it's going to go. I'm going to get lost in the jungle of the picture and try to find my way out. And it's more of sort of a thing that's a little less direct, you know. Or like Maurice Sendak was a great illustrator, but he was also an artist, because there was something so formal about the value of that work. Or I think of Wyeth versus Rockwell, you know. And Wyeth, even if you don't like him, there's something about the formal aspects of the blades of grass in Christina's world that is better maybe than the sort of the chalky surface of a Norman Rockwell. And of course, you know, the mystery of why Christina is like climbing up that hill versus the white people getting the turkey dinner. So. I mean, Norman Rockwell's great. Don't get me wrong, but it's about things outside of the image rather than and how it circulates rather than what's, well, Norman Rockwell's a genius, but.
Just to bounce this idea of expansion back, I'm wondering, especially maybe for you now making a stop action animation in what looks like your kitchen, or Dushko doing all these other kinds of projects outside the studio with publishing and whatnot, is there a way that you feel like your practice is not captured by the idea of painting or by what you show in your studio, and that maybe it's like needs to be recontextualized somehow to be fully understood in its multivalent ways? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes, I do.
You wanna?
Well, no, go ahead.
No, you.
Well, yeah, I think about that, and so I think of myself as a painter, but if I make something that's not a painting, not made with paint, is it a painting? I think the reason that I would argue it is because, or not, it doesn't actually, I don't really feel the need to define it, but, or to name it, but I think like your photos on the street of the different textures of like the brick and how the different brick, these are very, to my mind, very painterly ways of perceiving the world, even noticing the way buildings are painted or buses are painted. And so I started to think that it's sort of like I'm working, or I'm seeing the world, I'm experiencing the world as a painter, even when I'm not making paintings or thinking about paintings. And so what are these sort of core concerns of a painter? Well, they're light, hue, material, and so I think I'm sort of just, my brain has been so indoctrinated to think in these ways that now I see everything that way. And so I think that making these other things like ceramics or films or posters or prints, it's just sort of an extension of the painterly mind in a way. Though, you know, if I stop making any oil on canvas, would I still be a painter? I kind of think, yeah. It's like Mary was saying, sort of that end of the road moment, or you said closing down of the possibilities. It's sort of part of the way I see the world now.
And in that sense, then painting is expansive. It's not about painting itself expanding, but that the act of painting or the act of making work or the act of doing anything in this way is expansive. Like it opens up things in the world.
Right.
It makes the world more available.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how it exists within the world too, like with your talk, or I think of Rauschenberg's rebus about reading the painting and reading art history and what's it juxtaposed to and how it relates to other things.
Yeah, and I mean, paint is just a glue with other stuff mixed in, and it hardens. I mean, we're standing on concrete right now. It's sand mixed in with some sort of binder, and supposedly all our buildings in the future are going to be printed. And you know, I mean, that's. I mean, if we want to go there, we could say we live in painting, and or it will be that, or I don't know. That seems a little self-centered as a painter to say that, but I actually almost like feel like the opposite, or I have like the almost opposite feeling of the ethos of this question, which makes me feel incredibly old-fashioned, but like I want to make a painting that's that anyone can understand without, and that everyone thinks is incredible in any context. On any kind of wall, you know, like I want to make the ultimate autonomous painting. Yeah, that's non-relational.
But is
like that's like, you know, and I yeah.
Is it complete without the viewers?
Oh yeah, it's
shock and awe. Yeah,
it's actually complete without the viewer. Like the viewer doesn't need to be there, but
it seems like the expectation of their reaction is a huge part of the piece.
It's gonna be that incredible, and that whole of itself, and understandable, and like nothing, no stories outside of it, no representation. You know that, I mean. Yeah, and but I don't want it to be Ned Reinhardt. Like I don't want it to be boring. you know, I want to go to that's kind of the opposite of what I think the ethos of your question is, right? You know, like what isn't, I don't know, what else do I do, or I don't know.
I identify with that narcissism.
Yeah. Yeah, something that doesn't need support, you know, like, but of course that's not possible. I mean, I intellectually know that's not.
The bus painting, I'm literally making it now without any support. It's just going to be made entirely out of paint. Just, you know, because you can now, you know, acrylic paint can just be, doesn't have a support. It's kind of a weird thing. I think I've thought about this a lot because I was trained very much in a painting, you know, as a painter and as by painters, you know, for painting. And I've often wondered, you know, just reflecting on it as an education generally, like you were saying, like the things that we, at a certain point in time, maybe were trained to notice and to think were the concerns of painting, light, space, materiality. I think that's, you know, as far as kind of a basic education or way of engaging with the world is good and solid in some ways, but also needs other things, you know. And I've often reflected on the things that I was doing while I was being educated in this very formal, you know, sort of post-Bauhaus, whatever way. You know, and more the other things that I was doing, like playing in punk bands or like going to poetry readings, seeing films, were as important, even though there wasn't a word for that or an identifier. Like, what was I, you know, I don't know, like, was I still a painter then? I guess so, you know, and I've found going forward, I guess, a lot of freedom in being able to just take from whatever education I got, whatever sensibility I was trained in, and that let me, you know, make a magazine, like, or whatever, do whatever thing came up, because, but I do believe pedagogically in that footing of painting as a useful one, but I don't sort of put it above anything else. It seems to me, and it always seems to me that, I mean, part of the reason I like having the magazine, I like coming here and talking to different people and stuff like that, is because it, you know, you need to be able to connect it with other things, and that's what I saw a lot in this work. Actually, it's not just painting expanded. Actually, it's painting allowing other things to come in. Like, it's not like this hegemonic language, like, oh, now painting is, you know, it's got Northern California now, it's expand, you know, like, kind of thing. But rather, painting can come into conversation with all these other kinds of questions that are important. And it seems to me that politically, historically, materially, emotionally, it's at a much more open place than it used to be, and that from what I remember from when I was in school. And so I think Mary Heilman said it very well. I believe in that trajectory, you know, not just for painting, but just for art in general, to open and open and open, and yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. Do you have a question?
I have some, but
Go
you
ahead.
go next.
Okay, I just, you know, this sort of is popping into my head to just ask something to all of you about the idea of permission and how you know, you all sort of, you know, created your own presentations and brought them here, and I know some of you were nervous about speaking and whatever, but they were so fantastic, each one of them, and I just wanted to ask the question about permission and just simply what does that mean to you in your practice?
I could tell you a mantra that I tell students is, and we were talking about this at lunch, I always say do what you want to do, not what you feel you should do. And because we have to do all the kinds of things we should do in our real lives outside of the studio, and usually should indicates what other people will think, other choices and how it will circulate in the world, and like that idea of like rules and da-da-da-da-da. But want is desire, you know, and I always think that, you know, art really is about freedom, as cheesy as that sounds, and that you could express yourself in this way, in this manner that hopefully at least liberates yourself if you see your expression as a reflection of who and what and where you are as a person. And so I really think it's important just to be able, when you're, even if you do the dog painting that you don't want the world to see, to be able to do that and have the permission to do that, and give yourself the agency to be able to do that. I think art really is about agency, and that's not reified within a capitalist world, and the liberty to speak with the understanding, of course, in a postmodern context, what consciousness could be and how that was forming ideas of what agency could be, which could be a lie. And yet there is something very permissive about allowing yourself to do whatever it is that you need to do to get your yayas out.
Go for it.
Oh, I don't know, permission, gosh. I think a lot of, yeah, I mean, I've just been thinking a lot of what I've heard today too is the different rules and parameters that people are operating within, you know, and one of the things that I heard was that people, even like Kelty was making that, you know, speech about autonomy, even that autonomy is even that way of thinking is possible within the limits of that kind of object. So the question of permission, I mean, I think it's part of that whole, you know, and I guess what Keith's talking about too is a kind of an emotional kind of framework too. I think it has to be seen within that, and I don't think that we ever escape those different rules and boundaries. I think it's always, there's always some situation, some context, whether it's a gallery or a family or a critical conversation or whatever. So I guess I don't generally think of it in terms of permission, and maybe that's a failing of mine, but I think of it just in terms of, one of the ways I look at a situation is if you can look at the whole situation and see what might be missing or what might be necessary, oftentimes that's a very good direction to go in, because maybe that hasn't been permitted or whatever, that thing, for whatever reason, you know, so maybe that's actually how I, you know, sort of try to take my, what are those called? The people on the beach have them, a metal detector, you know, it's like a kind of, we all use that, like this kind of detector which tells us like, okay, this hasn't been done, this might really help, you know, but I don't think of it, I guess, so much in terms of permission, although I think that is an aspect of it.
Where are we time-wise for questions?
We're at 3:33.
And we want to do questions at what time?
When it's up to you, you're supposed to be done here at 4
With everything.
with everything.
Okay.
You can go to 4:15.
Can I just ask one question of those who are arguing for autonomy? Maybe between Vince and Kelty, or just to get you actually talking brass tacks about some of the things that you cherish. One thing that I noticed about your paintings, Kelty, and the way that you were describing texture in this related photographs had to do with a kind of slippage between like the color and the form or the surface that it's on, and there's something very compelling about the way you were talking about how the spray paint changed when it moved from one brick to the next brick depending on its relative absorbency. And one way in which Vince's sculptures are talked about in relation to their painted surfaces has to do with the kind of ways in which the paint re-articulates or swerves from the actual form of the thing, which is to say the relationship between the shading within the color and the form on which that shading is resting. And I wonder if you guys might talk to each other about that a little bit, like about a textured object with color that's either adhering to or slipping from its form as a way that your work might be related. I mean, not to give you an assignment, but I just noticed that as something that like...
I did have this moment when I was talking about it. I noticed that that's how the texture was working in those slides, and I remember thinking, that's actually not how it works in my paintings. Yeah. So I don't actually think my paintings, like the texture works that way, and unfortunately, so I mean, but even smoothness is a texture. Like the fact that I'm cognizant of that always, or what that is, and it's the realness of the painting itself is always being considered, and every inch of the painting is being considered, and I like to say loved. You know, all textures and all corners are loved equally.
It's a new idea of the all over.
It's an all over love.
I do think.
I don't know if that has anything to do with autonomy, though. I just that's how.
I think.
To talk about.
I think a similar thing does happen in your work, though, where the color, when it's put on with the spraying, pulses off the painting to a degree which is not explicable by its actual surface. There's an optical.
Yeah. Well, that's actually, but that is different. That's an optical effect versus a real textural effect.
Right.
And so I was just trying to separate those out from each other in something like more simple than my paintings by using those photographs. And so I grotesquely oversimplified it. And also one reason why I do that is because then photographing these optical effects, like my paintings are really optical, and they're also, but all the levels are really clearly separate in person because of the textural differences. And then when I show them all flattened on the screen, I feel like half the drama is lost. So that's one reason why I thought maybe I would try this way out. I don't know, it really worked, but. And also I just want to say, I don't know if I'm arguing for autonomy in general. Like I'm a relativist in that way. Like I don't think everyone should make like just I think that would be a boring world. Yeah, just me. But I'm just saying like I like the idea of making a painting, especially that doesn't have to be explained. Like that's I want sort of this instant communication. Like no one has to read anything about it, or doesn't have to they don't have to hear about my autobiography to understand it and feel it. You know, not saying this painting has been made, you know, or could be made.
Yeah, the impossibility.
Yeah. So just to be clear on that, but
which is what I relate to a lot. This sort of ideal. I mean, I have this continuing fantasy that I could make a sculpture that could not be understood, and that is what I think is so frustrating and beautiful for me about sculpture, is that it can always be understood because it exists in the world in 3 dimensions. So it could be mapped digitally. It could be completely understood. But my fantasy and part of the thing about painting is that I can mess with the form so that it might be more difficult to understand. But my fantasy is that I could make a sculpture that could barely be seen, like that it almost doesn't exist anymore, that it's so hard to see.
And so are you saying that the way that you're applying paint onto the surface is to frustrate a understanding of its three-dimensionality?
Yeah, it's my sort of feeble attempt at this ideal.
Well, it's not so feeble, because when you show 4 different views of the same piece and they look like 4 different pieces, I think it's onto something.
But you can, yeah, thank you, yeah. But it's, but that's also an image of the thing, which is really different than the thing and the experience of the thing.
I mean, I think that's the gap a lot of us seem to be working in. It's not the WYSIWYG, you know, what you see is what you get, of high modernism, or putatively of high modernism. but it seems like most of us take an interest in the gaps, you know, between a photograph of Obama and a painting of Obama, between a spray painted surface and a surface, between all these different things. I think, and I think that's very interesting. And I think that's actually, if painting has maybe a contribution to make to the culture generally, I think it'll probably be largely by exploring those kinds of things, because so much of what the general visual culture is going towards is concealing all those gaps for the benefit of people who already have power and are benefiting from the system as it is. And so I think any holes that we can poke into questions of perception, representation, construction are actually potentially crucial. I mean, I'm not hopeful. I wish I could say that I was hopeful that our army could destroy capitalism, or eradicate suffering, or the different things. I don't know if that's true, but I'm heartened by the attempt.
The primary formula for semiotics, of course, is the Saussurean sign. You know, the object that is the tree versus the word that addresses the object, the signified versus the signifier, in the totality of the idea of the semiotic sign, right? And I think the essential thing about that spurred on semiotics, but spurred on sort of cultural identity theory sometimes, is that, this is the pun, is that it's arbitrary that we call that object that word, and that there's that play in between those things. And I think the ineffability of the mystery of art, or even formal relationships between things that are sort of intuitive, are that they're exposing that breach between signifier and signified and noting that play, which, if you recognize that, if it sort of wakes you up, that hopefully you maybe have a Kantian sublime moment where you objectify yourself within the world and realize that we're just animals running around on this rock that we call Earth, and we think we know everything we know, but how much do we really know? And in that, too, comes, I think, a lot of my semiotics major friends became sort of Buddhists, because there is a sort of spirituality behind that, and that if we're all in this together and we all think, involved with ideas of language as a power, if we wake everybody up to realize how we're all commiserate together as a force, as a unit, as a community, then hopefully we make the world a better place. And whether that's contemplating a Mondrian painting or looking at a Hans Haacke, piece, if you're thinking about your thoughts, conscious of your consciousness, and being able to relate that to how you reflect upon the world, that's powerful. And there's something about that ineffability, that mystery, the stuff that you can't put into language, ultimately, that I think is the life force of any art, whether it's post-modernity, modernity, or the old masters.
That's a manifesto.
Yeah. Not having sleep does things to your brain.
So why don't you manage questions?
Yeah, okay.
Should we open it up?
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, let's pass the mic around. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I wanted to just maybe continue on with this notion of the painted expanded idea. And maybe also talk about the artist as we've been talking about, because I just read Andrea Fraser's essay on the 1% that she wrote for the Whitney Biennial last year. And in it, she was looking at how income disparity actually makes, when that happens, a lot of art gets bought, and the amount of money that is spent on art actually goes up. So income disparity actually increases the amount of art being sold and the amount, I guess, being invested in art, right? So one of the questions that she poses as a practitioner, as an artist, is how do we go beyond just the symbolic and historical significance of art? How does an artist start to take stock of the economic value of art? And that was one of my questions, having looked at the credit crisis and institutions collapsing, they can't support themselves. Not every museum can buy a $10 million painting. So how do painters, or is it possible for painters to take stock of the economic value of their object in a way that also places them responsibly in relation to what's been happening in the actual kind of real world? I don't want to make it just about money, but one could say, well, then you have to start thinking about the value of a painting. Do you want to say, I'm going to not sell a painting for more than 1 million? Or if you do
I'll say
just an example. Just an example.
Revolution. I'm not selling paintings for more than $1 million. You heard it today. Mary Heilman, will you sign? No, I mean, I don't have that problem. I don't know who does, yeah.
I don't know, give some to your friends.
Well, we were talking about notions of responsibility. I'm sorry to keep bringing up my classes, but, I'm a monk for arts my life, and so I'm, it's just what, okay, but we were just having this conversation. There was this guy who, really great artist, Sam Dakota, look him up, who really wants to get his work out to the world, right? And I teach comics to hopefully have the lightning bolts not hit me, because that work gets out for everybody. But I like what Mary was saying too about the internet and the notions of images circulating throughout the world. And I think there's nothing wrong with a populist image that's able to get out there and speak to the masses, and luckily the digital age allows for that, although the aura of the painting isn't translated necessarily, you aren't standing in front of it. But if it popularizes the idea of painting, it gets the people into the museums to pay whatever egregious amount they have to pay these days to see it, at least they feel that they could have a communication with it, and that they could relate to them, that it's not like a bank vault. I think, one of the people in the class brought up Gagosian, right, which always comes into, the phrase sometimes in these conversations, and saying, well, Gagosian sells to evil, whomever's, on some part of the world, and what about that? And that becomes a question. But I like to think if like nobody owns the image, nobody owns the work of art. If you read about like the Matisse that they're trying to acquire, that the art family from the Nazis, Goebbels might have owned that Matisse painting or whomever, and he's evil. The Matisse painting's not necessarily translating to him. Maybe it's in a crate, but then the painting succeeds in existing in the world, maybe because of its value. And so I don't want to diminish the value of art, or the fruitful garden that happens in flush times where people are throwing money at art, because hopefully that allows for a lot of things to come up. And I think if you're making work that's about something that's meaningful to you, that hopefully that could also translate to whomever has it in their living room or their study. I always think that's sort of an interesting litmus test. Like if the man has it in the study, would they be able to be affected by it? Would it be easily consumable or commodifiable by them, or palatable, or does it make them think? And then that's the test of the work of the art that comes from the studio. So. But I also like to think that we're in a world now that you could do paintings, but you could do comics, you could make stickers and animations, and it's all good, and have them go out and circulate into the world if that's part of your agenda, and there's nothing wrong with that.
But I think what I was trying to also talk about is that the meaning of the artwork is always separate from money, right? It's always separate from who buys it, because art is always an object, even if it's a concept, and it's always up for speculation, economic speculation. Yeah. And that does not depend on the meaning. There's so many factors in terms of connoisseurship, so forth, trend setting, timeliness, a lot of luck is part of it as well. So there are all these factors, but I was just wondering how could a painter as well start to insert themselves and say, yes, there's the meaning that I'm trying to grapple with, educate people and so forth, but there's also the economic part, which this is not part of, the interpretive meaning stuff, right?
Art versus commerce, that age-old question.
In a way,
yeah. Well, if Michelangelo's painting the ceiling, he's still putting something extra into it. That's him. And this is sort of an age-old, I think, debate, but it's still important, especially now when you're thinking of the 1%, and that notion of responsibility. But I think everything's been, Van Gogh we know because, Theo's wife marketed Van Gogh. Like, it was marketed, and it entered into the system. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think when you sell out, that means that you're compromising your intentions, your soul, for money, which is a negative thing. But if you are able to somehow retain that, if it's possible to retain it, and the Beatles were a great band, and they were very popular, and you still listen to the music, and it doesn't compromise the message, but it was able to get out there. But it's a hard tightrope walk.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but I think this idea, that artists are better because they suffer is really bad and dangerous. And I've noticed, since the recession hit, particularly weirdly in the New York Times, they seem to sort of relish this idea that artists will suffer. And I think it's a relatively new notion, maybe like late 19th century. And in my experience, artists work really well when they're not worrying about basic necessities. And I don't think there should be any, barring a fundamental revolution, I think we have to accept certain realities of the economic system we live in. And I don't think that, I guess also you can only say no so many times, and then you've excluded yourself from participating in a dialogue and in the situation. So I think that this goes back to the idea of guilt again, like economic guilt. And is there a moral dilemma in how responsible are you for how your work enters the world once it leaves the studio or your control? It's a big question, but I would say I would err on the side of for all artists to have a roof over their heads and be well fed and have time and energy to devote to their work.
Amy, you said something like where where it was like, okay, this queer modernism. Did you say something like that? And I think that to me is more of a powerful political statement than having it kind of on the surface of the work. And that seems to be like part of contemporary art is that like it's that the identity politics or whatever aren't really on the surface of the work, but they're like just inherent in it. Like, it's hard. It's tough for me because I'm a straight white male. But like, let's say, for somebody who is like homosexual making paintings, they're just basic abstract paintings. Like that, there's some sort of real integrity in that, and it seems to be like that. Because they have gone away from the critique, and it's like going back into the work. It's not so much, and the work is like in and of itself again. And there's, I don't know. I think the statement there is more about the way that things could be, should be, would be, rather than this critique. And like I've been around a few different panels that are like this, like the Painter one in Minneapolis and this other one in New York, just in the last month and a half. And it seems like we go right away to like how we can quantify painting and what we can talk about intellectually, which comes down to like, the political aspects of painting and everything. And I think that what these symposiums are trying to actually do is to open it up and get back to talking about maybe the things that Kelty's hinting at and that Vince kind of got into about the energy within the work, which is really difficult stuff to quantify and talk about. And it's much easier to be like, well, these things are these problems, but talking about it in a way of like, there's not really a problem, or talk about the pleasure, or is it pleasure, or is it like an experience? What is that experience of making, and what is the experience that we have as artists that we pass on to the viewer? And that idea, I think Kelty was kind of getting to, like what the viewer feels when they see how much freedom she's exploring or pleasure she's having, and how that's passed on to the other people, and how art can change through pleasure. The Beatles were really pleasurable, I think that was more powerful than like the message, or beauty creates more beauty, sort of, and how these art is always an agent of change, inherently maybe, I don't know. So, but Vince, I wanted you to talk more about that energy. That's one thing.
Well, I was just thinking that when you were saying this, that I think, and this relates sort of to the whole conversation we're having, is that I believe that we can transform the world by transforming ourselves, and I find all these really big questions very overwhelming very quickly, and which always brings me back to the studio, which is the only place I feel like I can work through stuff, and I think that artists can set this example of what is important, looking is important, you know. Trying to open your mind is important.
To return a little bit to the economic question, I mean, one of the things that I think about often too, and is that, I mean, obviously there are a few different economic systems going on, at least, even when you talk about the art world. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And you know, there's an educational, like, salary or wage kind of economy system going on that a lot of us probably participate in. There's a gallery system of expensive, unique objects. That's one kind of economy that's going on. There's a reproducible objects economy, which is kind of lower price per unit that's going on, that includes like comics or magazines or things like that. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about, I mean, and I participate in all these various ones too, and I write, and so there's that whole economic system as well. I like having that variety, and I'll tell you, I mean, one of the times I experienced that very strongly was Paper Monument, the magazine that I edit. We had a booth at Frieze, and at Frieze, I think the admission price was $40, and it was a non-union situation they had set up on an island, which was like a kind of legal gray area in New York. We paid $600 for an electrical outlet hole that was this big. So that was, you know, staggering to me. And everybody, not everybody, but pretty much like 99.5% of the people who came to Frieze it completely ignored the magazine section and just walked by and were there to either, you know, buy and sell or see and be seen or something. And that was unpleasant, and I found myself in conflict with that situation. A different situation was the New York Art Book Fair, which was at PS1, and it was free to get into. And you could, if you wanted, you could buy something for $5, or you could buy something for, I don't know, what a very expensive thing would be there, like $15,000 maybe or something, but on a very different scale. And the interaction was completely different. It was utterly, utterly different. Everyone was very friendly. Everyone talked to each other, and everyone were greeted and treated each other as peers. And you know, it's not to say that I don't, you know, a lot of art that I like was at Frieze, a lot of people that I like were at Frieze, et cetera. But the world that I can more imagine participating in and more imagine endorsing was going on at PS1. And I was glad that I had some way of interacting with that as a person who makes magazines, where you can buy one for $8 or I can give you one. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's a very, you know, it's just a different thing. And I think I mean, just now speaking, to go back to speaking as a painter, I think one of the difficulties I felt as a painter is that as a person, I actually really enjoy spending $10 and seeing a movie, or spending $12 and getting a great book. And the only way that I get painting is by trading them. I couldn't afford anybody's paintings here, you know. The only way I would get is like have a friendship. And so I have a collection of paintings. It's not like I'm opposed to that, but I'm also very aware that the only way I can get that is by trading. And so, you know, and how those two worlds interact is very significant. And I don't think that you can, I'm not saying, you know, we have to destroy the Frieze model or whatever. It may sort of destroy itself, or it may do something like that. But I do think that it's very, very important to have the other thing going on, and I include in that the schools and non-commercial enterprises. And, you know, Kelty was saying, give them to your friends. You know, non-economic participation, I think is very, very important. But that's not to ignore the very real questions that Amy, I think, was pointing to of you know, paying bills, having health insurance, eating. I mean, it's not funny. It's very serious. And I don't think artists should, you know, if you make a world where people can't make some living by being artists, then you're just the only people who can be artists are independently wealthy people who have family money, and that's a horrible prospect. So I think we have to be, and it's very real. I mean, it's a very real aspect that nobody talks about. You know, I often find like, how is so-and-so doing this? You know, oh yeah, hold on, there's like a shitload of secret money going on there, you know, like I shouldn't feel so bad about, like, you know, these other things. So I think it's something that needs to be talked about more, and I think the only way that we'll even begin to address these things is by being candid and sort of straightforward about it. And it requires, it's not like one magic pill that's gonna, you know, do the whole thing in. It's the concerted. I very much believe what Vincent believes in is that you change things by changing yourself. I also believe that a concerted, gentle but persistent and multifaceted pressure is the only thing that's going to have an effect. And doing it together, I actually think is very important.
I think there are forms of resistance that can happen even within these very specific formats. Like, there are ways of doing certain things and not other things, and
so in the long term, there's museums where hopefully the artwork that we want to see ends up. I mean, yesterday at SF MoMA, I saw this amazing juxtaposition of a De Chirico and a Picabia, and it cost me $15 to have that experience, and it was extraordinary. And you know, I'm assuming those were given to the museum or donated to the museum or acquired by money or rich people.
Unfortunately,
we have just. Should we do one more question?
We have time for maybe one more very brief question. Right?
And then we'll kind of wrap this up.
I'd like to ask, you know, I assume most of us here are either artists or, you know, students of art, etc. My question is everyone an artist, or does art require an intention or a choice on a person's part to be an artist? I say this as a high school art teacher who often have to, shall we say, try to light the spark of enthusiasm for art in some students. So should we think that everyone can be an artist, or is being an artist a choice that each person makes to consciously become an artist?
Go.
That's a great question.
How about a yes or no down the line? Amy, yes or no?
Maybe. Yeah.
That works. Kelsey.
I think of it as a continuum. I think that you know, it's obvious that some people. When I teach you drawing, for example, just to go to something basic like that, I firmly believe that everybody can draw in some way. I also know that certain people are much better at it than others. It's like anything, you know. So I do think that, and also when I think about to just think about a completely different sphere, you know, I played soccer relatively seriously through high school and whatever. I play soccer, but now I'm much better at watching soccer, you know. And I think the same thing is true. And you know, being an artist all the time too would be unbearable. I mean, that would be a fate worse than death in a way, you know. So we all have to be, you know, friends and parents and you know, teachers and all these other things too. So I think it is in a certain way, it's you know, a certain kind of special category, but that everyone participates in. And I think artists should also remember the different things that they are too.
And this is just going to be the very last question.
It's a question too. This kind of pertains to Keith mostly, but everybody, of course, and everybody in the room. But when you're talking about semiotics and this sort of joining of sign and signifier, can you share with us a moment before you knew about what that was, where that kind of maybe crystallized for you?
Sure. Well, sorry, no. Oh, no.
This is the sign, and this is the signifier.
Oh, my gosh. Signifier and signifier. Well, you know, in answer a little bit to your question, maybe too, it's like I think like what is an artist in terms of like what does being an artist mean, you know, and how do you qualify that? And I think that could be very personal. I like the idea that people could think like artists no matter if they take this as a profession, but I think like art profession is sort of oxymoronic. You're kind of making it, and hopefully you could, if you want to, get it out there, and if you get, you know, accolades, or if somebody pays you for something, that's sort of icing on the cake, you know. But I like the idea of critical thinking. Certainly, you know, growing up as a gay person and stuff like that in Colorado in the suburbs, you know, I'm kind of old, I'm 46 or whatever, and you know what gay people are because you saw John Ritter on Three's Company act as a gay person, right. But you don't necessarily see yourself meeting up with that thing, and you're like, what is this word? What is this language? What is the power to this language? Do I want to get beat up in high school? You know, like, do I want to, like, what is it to perform? What is this language? And so in a deep internal way, I felt that. But also, you know, my access to art in Colorado was really through comics. That was my access to what I thought art was. The art museum there is better now, and there are better galleries. And I think that in the culture, now it's okay and cool to like art. And so there's more nonprofit spaces and things are opening it up. But, you know, my access to art was really through comics. Comics in and of themselves are about word-image combinations, where the words are sort of the lyrics that the music, the image is sort of illuminating. You know, it's like the blues, you have a blues musician say, oh, my baby left me and I feel so bad, and you hear the twing, twang, twum of the guitar. The lyrics sort of guide you and inform you what the music is about, and the music illuminates even further maybe the emotions that it's about, and you notice that sort of disparity. And so I saw it all in the world, you know, when I went to college and I like learned semiotics, I was like, oh, here's a language and here's a formula for the things that I was already perceiving within the world and in the context of the world. And I think, you know, it goes back to reading the Richard Scarry books when you're a little kid. You know what a fire hydrant is because you see the words fire hydrant above that object next to wormy. And you enter into that idea of language. But I think we're all born as, you know, animals within this world that it feels all alive and everything. And language is the filters that start, you know, compartmentalizing things. And you start forgetting the sensation and what it is to be alive and the feeling of that. And art is about waking you up. And so I think, you know, the Saussure formula really works to talk about it. But hopefully we all feel it, and hopefully, you know, everybody is a critical thinker that thinks like an artist within the world about their place within it and their responsibility and you know, what a beautiful place the planet could be. Now I'm starting to sound cheesy.
All right. Okay, so we are at 4:06, which means we're 6 minutes over time, which I think is remarkable given how much we had to do and how much these artists brought to the table. So yay, Libby, for being the time coordinator here. So we have, everybody is invited at 4:30 to a reception to get, or now, whenever. We're going to walk over there. And I just wanted to tie up loose ends and just say that this has been a most stimulating day, and just to give heartfelt thanks personally and on behalf of CCA for your honesty and your openness and your candid speech and everything that you've given us today. And these 10 vignettes and the discussions that came out of them, I think we'll all take with us as food for thought and be fortified by them. And I would just maybe harken back to something that was at the end of Maliko's talk when he was discussing the discussion about narrative and talking about the power of a local narrative as opposed to and against a grand narrative, and talking about a local narrative as being always in flux, always never defined, not fixed, always in contradiction to a grand narrative and to stories that would be received. And that the emphasis, I think you said, was on narrativity rather than on the narrative itself, which is to say on the verb, on the motion, on the action, rather than on the noun and on the object. I think if we can leave this thinking of painting expanded in terms of painting the verb rather than painting the noun, we can line up those thoughts. And so I just wanted to say thank you again to everybody, and to everybody who organized this. This has been a major labor of love, and phenomenal that you filled the hall today. So finally, thank you to you. Okay, good night.